So you had a look at Fidelity's, is it called the small changes calculator?
The power of small amounts.
Okay, yeah. And it looked at, what increasing your pension contributions by 1% does, right? So can we go through some of these numbers?
Yeah. So I did 3 different ones, a 25-year-old, a 35 and a 45-year-old. So if a 25-year-old was on 28,000 a year and they did just 1% extra, which is going to cost them £6 a week, which I think is quite an achievable amount for most, to cut back on, 72,000 extra in retirement, which that £6 a week translates into a huge number. And then 35-year-olds on a £45,000 salary would give them an extra 58,000 a year. And again, that's only costing you £9 a week to go in. And if you're 45, I put on 100,000 salary. So at that top end, still going to give you 59,000 extra as a lump sum, and that costs you £20 a week. So even if you were earning a lot, you might think, God, that 1% is actually going to be a lot. It's £20 out of your pocket.
And it's not really out of your pocket because in many cases it's coming pre-tax, right? So
exactly.
If you run it through the taxation, the £9 might only end up as 6 or 5 in your pocket.
Exactly.
Do you know what assumptions they were making in terms of growth?
Yeah, so they're not wild. It's 5% a year growth every year, and that your salary increases by 3.5% a year.
Are people's salaries increasing by 3.5% a year?
I think there's been a pretty broad stagnation of incomes over the last 10 to 20 years. We've seen a big rise in pay in the last few years to compensate for inflation, but it hasn't really it hasn't really got people back to where they are. I think most people will kind of scoff at the idea that you get 3.5 every year. But I do think long-term incomes tend to track inflation. Otherwise, people just get pushed into the floor.
And also promotions are going to get you into that next bracket over your lifetime.
It's big jumps, isn't it, in pay?
Yeah.
What tends to happen is you earn a level and then you take a big step up through a promotion, a pay rise. So it's not 3.5% a year is not going to be 3.5% a year. It's going to be I coast for 10 and then I jump up 20% or whatever. Yeah. The growth thing is interesting at 5% because I know the calculator says it doesn't accommodate for inflation, but 5% is the inflation-adjusted growth rate of the global stock market for the last 100 years, I think. Because I think it gets about 8 nominal.
So you're not beating inflation then with this?
Well, 5%
return.
that would give you a figure that does accommodate for... So, because if the growth rate of the stock market is 8% and inflation is about 3%, you would get 5% real. So I think it's probably quite fair.
Yeah, I don't think it's mad. I don't think it's like when you see these crazy numbers and the growth rate is 8% or anything like that.
When you forecast pensions, what does the regulator say you have to do there? 20%. Do what you want.
I'm really cautious, so I use a modelling tool, and I always do inflation 3%, investments 4%.
Oh, so you're only doing 1%.
That's very
growth.
conservative.
Well, because I don't want ever to look a client in the eye when they get to retirement and the money plan's not worked. It's much better to celebrate there being more.
So you get them to their plan with a 1% real growth rate, and
I try to.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
You're like the best salesperson ever, like under promise and overachieve. You're like, you'll get 1%. Oh, you got 5. Well done.
I think clients think I have this personality disorder because pre-retirement I'm really mean and telling them always to do more and it's never enough. And then after retirement they're like, what? And I'm telling them to spend lots. So they have to get used to the new me in retirement.
So, I mean, can we acknowledge though that for some people, the pushback will be that even 1% is not affordable. Mm-hmm.
Well, then do 0.5%. Do a £5 a month, whatever you can do. Because I tend to when I increase my pension, I always do it to an amount that scares me, and then I find that I adjust my lifestyle around it, cut back on those things that I could often do without. But if things are really tough, then you just do what you can manage.
This was a clip from our episode with Lisa Conway-Hughes, financial advisor. We talked about small changes you can make to make a big difference in your life. Check out the full episode right here.